Okay, this final video is going to walk you through annotating one of your own sources. And again, we're going to focus on credibility and bias, and then also on the type of evidence that's presented in the source. So if we look at source F, the most immediate thing that we're going to notice looking at the source information is that this is a source that's produced by the United States Department of Energy, their Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. So what we'll notice about the bias is that it's not going to talk about, as it's the government speaking, the negative side of what they're presenting. So if they're presenting energy savers, tips on saving energy, they're not going to talk about the negatives, because then they wouldn't be able to promote their interests of getting their people to save energy. We also know that they're not going to talk about why the government shouldn't intervene and make green practices. So they're going to be for green practices because they're the government. Credibility, they get a lot of it from being the government. They have credibility there. But they also have credibility in terms of this specific topic. Why? What gives them credibility on green practices, especially given what this document is? And if we look at the title, again, we notice that it's about tips on how to save energy. Tips on how to save energy reminds me of a certain type of green practice. These are green practices, the tips, the energy savers. So they have credibility because they have firsthand experience with fostering green practices. Okay. Now we want to look at this and the text and determine, okay, what type of evidence are we looking at? So, we read, did you know the typical U.S. family spends about $1,900 a year on home utility bills? Utility bills meaning like energy bills, resources. Unfortunately, a large portion of that energy is wasted. So who's wasting the energy? People. Which is telling me that people also need to play a role. And each year, electricity generated by fossil fuels for a single home puts more carbon dioxide into the air than 2 average cars. So we are polluting. Average people are polluting just by living. And as for the transportation, it accounts for 67% of all U.S. oil consumption. The good news is that there's a lot you can do to save energy and money at home in your car. Start making small changes today. So the source is telling us, because it's the government, and they want us to change some sort of behavior, is telling us that there's actually incentives for cutting back on our energy use. This is what the government's trying to tell us. But they're also not telling us what that incentive is, here at least. And then we're given this list of suggestions. Install a programmable thermostat, lower the thermostat, all things that you can do or that average people can do. And if they can do it, that means it's a practice. And so what I'm noticing about this source, in terms of evidence, is that this is an example of one way the government and citizens can foster green practices. And because it's an example, I can envision using that as an example in my paragraph, in my essay. And notice I didn't have to read the details so much as understand what kind of evidence I'm looking at. And that's sort of your objective as you're looking at the source. Identify what type of evidence you're looking at.